The Balkan Peninsula, a region marked by a long history of interethnic conflict, war, and foreign domination, all factors that lead to economic challenges. In this video, we'll rank the economies of the former Yugoslavia, Albania, and the Balkan-adjacent Moldova. The breakup of Yugoslavia happened slowly and then all at once, beginning after the death of Josip Broz Tito in 1980, the maverick who ruled Yugoslavia for 35 years, and then even faster after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the December of 1991. The final act would see U.S. warplanes and American bombs over the skies of these former East Bloc nations. Bookended by America's Operation Desert Fox and the start of the global war on terror, the 1999 Operation Allied Force, the U.S.-led NATO military operation against Serbian forces, would close the curtain on Yugoslavia once and for all. In its place would emerge 7 nations. The 7th, Kosovo, to this day is not universally recognized as a sovereign state. In addition to Serbia, who still claims Kosovo as an autonomous Serbian province, 5 members of the European Union, Greece, Cyprus, Romania, Slovakia, and Spain, do not recognize Kosovo's sovereignty. Kosovo's status as a country is immaterial to this analysis. You're free to believe either way, whether a country, a part of Serbia, a NATO protectorate, or the second Albania. But we have separate economic data for Kosovo, and we will include it as a separate entity from Serbia for this analysis. In addition to the former Yugoslavia, we will include Albania and the former Soviet Republic of Moldova. For economic comparison, these countries mostly have populations in the range of 2 to 4 million, with the exception of Serbia, population 6.6 million, and Montenegro with only 600,000. As the Balkan region is renowned for its complex interethnic tensions, we will first examine the current ethnic breakdown of these countries. Without reconciliation, continued ethnic conflicts and tensions interfere with economic progress. Further, the failure to resolve such tensions enables the political class to use them as a distraction against endemic corruption, failed economic policies, and other political shortcomings. And they are fertile ground for malign foreign interference. Moldova, to a lesser extent, is also marked by an identity crisis. A separate Moldovan identity was fostered under the Soviet rule, enhancing the divide between it and its cousin, Romania. A strong generational divide exists in Moldova, with much of the younger generation seeing Romanian and Moldavian as one and the same, a single ethnic group and a single language, while the older generation persists in seeing them as 2 separate groups with 2 separate languages. Moldova is also marked by another, more tangible divide, the breakaway enclave of Transnistria, or Prednistrovia, depending on what language you are speaking, and from which side of the river Dniester you are standing. With its relative simplicity, we'll start with Moldova. Excluding Transnistria or Prednistrovia, which is comprised of over 50% ethnic Russians and Ukrainians, the 2014 census indicated that the population of Moldova is composed of 74% ethnic Moldovans, 7% ethnic Romanians, 7% Ukrainians, 5% Gagauz Turks, and 4% ethnic Russians. We'll segue next into Albania, not a former member of Yugoslavia, but as we'll see, ethnic Albanians compose a significant portion of the ethnic groups in some of the former Yugoslav countries. Albania is quite homogeneous, with 92% identifying as Albanians in the 2023 census. And then we roll into the former Yugoslavia proper. Here, we'll need even more colors. Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia are relatively homogeneous ethnically, 84% Serbs, 92% Croats, and 83% Slovenes, respectively. Bosnia and Herzegovina is ethnically diverse, with 50% Bosniaks, 31% Serbs, and 15% Croats. Montenegro is not far behind, with 41% Montenegrins, 33% Serbs, 9% Bosniaks, and with an Albanian population of around 5%. Kosovo is nearly as ethnically homogeneous as Albania, with 92% of the population identifying as Albanians. North Macedonia, flanked by Albania and bordering Greece, has a population composed of 58% ethnic Macedonians and 24% ethnic Albanians. A result of ethnic cleansing during the Yugoslav War, a large population of surviving Albanians was deported to North Macedonia. Next, we'll get into the economic ranking. We'll determine our economic ranking by examining 9 factors related to population, GDP, corruption, and economic structure. A large population means more human capital. Countries with a higher population will be awarded more points. Population loss over the last decade will provide us with indirect information related to the economic conditions on the ground. Countries with high population loss, assumed to be largely a result of economic migration, will be awarded less points. The factors related to GDP are more straightforward. Bigger is better. Corruption acts to divert resources and slow economic growth. Countries with greater corruption, as measured by Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, will be given a lower score. Finally, key structural elements of the economy will be examined. A high percentage of the workforce employed in agriculture indicates a lower level of economic development. A higher level of manufacturing and industry, measured by the Manufacturing Value Added, MVA, as a percentage of the GDP, indicates the presence of greater economic diversification, investment, and a more skilled workforce. A high level of remittances as a percentage of GDP indicates economic hardship in the home country. A country that sees a high proportion of its GDP based on its citizens sending money home from abroad indicates a lower economic rank. Here we have the 2023 population data for these countries, with the countries arranged by GDP per capita. Serbia stands far above the rest at 6.6 million, and North Macedonia at the very bottom with only 600,000. Most of the other countries are around 2 to 4 million, with the average for the group at 2.8 million. For the ranking, we ordered these countries, 1 through 9, from lowest to highest population, and perform a linear regression in order to create a points curve. We then plugged the country's actual population into the linear equation and solved for x, the number of points awarded for the given metric. North Macedonia receives 1.1 points, and Serbia receives 11.8 points. For population loss over the last decade, we have this data. Slovenia is the only country without significant population loss, with a gain of 2.9% over the last 10 years. Moldova is the worst, at negative 13%, while Bosnia and Croatia are at negative 10 and 9 respectively. At the bottom, Moldova receives 0.8 points, while Slovenia, at the top for this metric, receives 9.9 points. For the 2023 GDP, we find the EU members Slovenia and Croatia, along with the non-EU member Serbia, at the top of the GDP ranking. The 2023 GDP of Serbia exceeds Slovenia and is slightly below Croatia's GDP of 83 billion USD. For 2023 GDP per capita, we again find Slovenia and Croatia at the top at 32,000 and 22,000 USD respectively. Moldova and Kosovo are at the bottom, with less than 7,000 and less than 6,000 USD respectively. For economic growth, we will calculate an absolute growth ratio. We will perform a linear regression on the GDP data for the periods 2000 to 2013 and 2014 to 2023. To compute the growth ratio, we will divide the slope for the second period, M2, by the slope for the first period, M1. This calculation is shown here for Moldova, yielding an absolute growth ratio, M2 over M1, of 1.3. When compared with the other countries, Moldova and Albania have the highest absolute growth ratio between these two periods. Most of these countries are in between 0.8 and 1, while Kosovo has the lowest absolute growth ratio at 0.6. Many countries across the globe experienced a slowdown in growth following 2013, leading to absolute growth ratios of less than 1. For reference, the absolute growth ratio of the entire EU was 0.6, while economic powerhouses like India, China, and the US saw absolute growth ratios of 1.3, 1.4, and 2 respectively. Corruption, as measured by the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, indicates that lower corruption roughly trends with a higher GDP per capita. For this metric, a higher CPI indicates lower corruption. The two EU members, Slovenia and Croatia, have the lowest levels of corruption, while Montenegro, a promising candidate for EU membership, is not far behind. The rest of the group have higher levels of corruption, ranging from a CPI of 35 to 39. When we examine the 10-year average for employment in agriculture as a percentage of total employment, we find Moldova and Albania to be strong outliers. For Moldova, 58% of the workforce is employed in agriculture. For Albania, 39%. High employment in the agricultural sector generally indicates a lower level of economic development. For reference, the impoverished Central Asian nation of Tajikistan has around 45% of total employment coming from agriculture. For Kosovo, there is no available data in the World Bank dataset, so we've given it a value slightly less than Moldova and Albania, as Kosovo typically scores somewhere near these two countries. For the 10-year average of manufacturing value added as a percent of GDP, we find Slovenia to be a significant outlier at 20%. This indicates a strong industrial base and a higher degree of economic complexity. For reference, Poland, a regional industrial powerhouse, has an MVA as a percentage of GDP of 17%. Serbia, along with several other countries, range from 12 to 14%. Albania and Montenegro are the lowest. For Montenegro, its economy is largely based on services and tourism, with a further boost from wealthy foreigners buying its coastal real estate. As the final metric, we will examine remittances as a percentage of GDP. Kosovo and Moldova have the highest percentage of their GDP based on remittances. This indicates that a high volume of citizens leave their native country to pursue better economic conditions abroad, sending money back home to support their family and relatives. In the case of Moldova, the ease of acquiring Romanian citizenship and access to the Eurozone contributes to the high levels of remittances. For reference, Tajikistan regularly sees remittances as a percentage of GDP of around 40%, while the nation of Uzbekistan is around 13%, more comparable to Kosovo and Moldova. We then tally the points from each of the 9 factors and arrive at our final ranking. We find Slovenia at the top with 77 points, followed by Serbia and Croatia at 58 and 57 points respectively. We should point out that Serbia's much larger population, about 2 to 3 times the size of most of the other group members, boosts it in the rankings. Serbia misses out from the Eurozone boost, however. Membership in the EU requires lower levels of corruption and comes with financial aid, foreign investment, and better access to the lucrative Eurozone market, all factors that help to contribute to the high economic rank of Slovenia and Croatia. Serbia, despite the NATO bombardment at the turn of the millennium and its non-EU membership status, is doing fairly well, all things considered, perhaps even continuing the non-aligned ideological legacy of Yugoslavia. In the middle, we have North Macedonia, Bosnia, Montenegro, and Albania, with 38 to 42 points. Finally, at the bottom, we have Kosovo at 29 points and Moldova at 28 points. We can also compare these economic rankings to the 2023 GDP per capita purchasing power parity metric. The Yugoslav wars had an especially outsized impact on Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, and to a lesser extent, Croatia and Montenegro. Slovenia and Macedonia were largely spared from the destruction. The painful memories of these conflicts and the continued ethnic and religious tensions, unsurprisingly, continue to this day. These are very relevant contextual factors when assessing the economies of the former states of Yugoslavia. Moldova, to a much lesser extent, has also been marked by war. Somewhat common for post-Soviet countries, 1991 to 1992 was marked by a brief war, one between Russian-backed separatists and Moldovan forces. The temporary ceasefire continues to this day. Moldova's contested borders limits its hope for EU accession while also guaranteeing a continued instability and uncertainty. While joining the ranks of the EU is uncertain, Moldova is a member of the Contested Borders Club, with co-members Ukraine and Georgia, which have border disputes with ethnic Russian enclaves, a part of the Soviet legacy. Corruption and financial schemes have conspired to deplete Moldova's capacity for economic development. Famously, in 2014, $1 billion, equivalent to around 12% of Moldovan GDP, disappeared from the country's banks. Albania is no stranger to large-scale financial schemes either. In 1997, widespread civil unrest precipitated by government-backed pyramid schemes resulted in the collapse of the Albanian government. As usual, the future is uncertain, although, perhaps, more uncertain than usual. Many of the former East Bloc nations have benefited tremendously from joining the European Union. However, if we examine the absolute growth rate for the 27 EU member countries, we can notice an alarming trend. The big economies of the EU, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, are no longer growing. The progressive inclusion of more former East Bloc developing nations has sought to offset the decreased growth of the big old money economies. We see a continued push for more expansion in the EU, of which it is hard to deny the benefits. But if the major economies of Western Europe cannot restart their growth, we could see the emergence of yet another pyramid scheme, something, sadly, not unfamiliar to those nations who used to live under the banner of the star and the hammer and sickle.